Reconstruction period in France set about reorganizing France between the years of 1789 and 1792, championing civic equality before the law.
In August of 1789, the National Constituent Assembly published a document of broad political principles that specifically applied to men and not women. This document was called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The Declaration drew on political language of the Enlightenment and the Declaration of Rights of Virginia in 1776. This document proclaimed that all men were born and remain free and equal in rights, with natural rights of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. All citizens were to be equal before the law and were to be equally admissible to all public dignities, offices, and employments, according to their capacity and with no other distinction than that of their virtues and talents. Any taxation was made equal to your capacity to pay, and property was a right for all citizens. This document was directed against the abuses of the old French monarchical and aristocratic regime. The two most important ideas of the document were civic equality and popular sovereignty.
On October 5, 1789, women marched on Versailles, forcing the royal family to return to Paris, leading to the control of the government under mob violence. Not an explicit attempt for the extension of natural and political rights to women. However, the demonstrators believed that equality among all French citizens should extend rights to women, political minorities, and landless citizens. The march included 7,000 women demanding more bread, and this forced King Louis XVI to agree to sanction the decrees of the Assembly and ratify the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The next day, King Louis and his family were forced to move to Paris, and later the National Constituent Assembly also moved to Paris, which helped to stabilize the political climate of France for a little while.
A specific prominent woman in France during the Reconstruction was Olympe de Gouges, who noticed the laws restricting women from being full citizens, and later went on to write her Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen in 1791 as a response to the Declaration of Rights of Man and the decisions of the Assembly in the years following.
Once the Assembly moved to Paris, it set about reorganizing France with the intent to protect civic equality. The National Constituent Assembly abolished the ancient French provinces and established in their place 83 administrative units called departments. The departments were all about equal sizes. They were further subdivided into districts, cantons, and communes. Indirect elections were held for assemblies. All ancient judicial courts were abolished and replaced by new unified courts of elected judges and prosecutors. This department reorganization proved permanent and still exists today in France. Another thing the Assembly changed was the method by which elections and changes in political office occurred. It was broken down based on property rather than birthright, allowing for more people to have a say in government. However, women were still completely excluded, not being able to vote or hold any type of office.
The Civil Constitution of the Clergy was a law passed on July 12, 1790 during the French Revolution that caused immediate subordination of the Catholic Church in France to the French government, turning it into a secular branch of the state. It emphasized that officials of the Church could not provide commitment to anything outside of France, specifically the Pope, due to his power and the influence he had. It also made all bishops and priests elected. The Church lost much of its authority it had to govern itself and was now subject to the people. The opposition to this was strong and caused a problem between the church and the state, and so to fight the resistance of the Assembly ruled that the clergy had to take an oath stating the individual's allegiance to France. In February 1791, Pope Pius condemned both the Civil Constitution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, making the beginning of the Catholic Church offensive against the Revolution and the Liberalist movement.
The Chapelier Law was a piece of legislation written in June of 1791 that was directed against guilds, or the organizations that protected skilled workers in the old regime. This new law emphasized each worker as an individual and prevented any labor organizations in France from forming for over half a century. In addition, these labor organizations opposed the new values and laws of the Revolution, such as political and social individualism.
The short-lived French Constitution of 1791 was the first written constitution in France, created after the collapse of the absolute monarchy of the ancient regime. One of the basic precepts of the Revolution was adopting constitutionality and establishing popular sovereignty. The institution provided for an elaborate system of indirect elections to thwart direct popular pressure on the government. Citizens of France were divided into active and passive categories. The active citizens had political rights. The men paid annual taxes equal to 3 days of local labor wages, and they were allowed to vote. They chose electors who voted for the members of legislature. To serve as an elector or member of the legislature, property qualifications were required. Only 50,000 out of 25 million men were qualified to be an elector or member of the Legislative Assembly. The passive citizens only had civil rights, and they had no property or voting rights. They are entitled to protection with relation to liberty, but could not choose government bodies. Passive citizens made up 3 million men in France, and all women of France were reduced to the passive citizens. Constitutional agreements transferred political power from the aristocratic wealth to all forms of propertied wealth in the nation.
The Constitution was finally passed in 1791. The organization of the French government was redefined. Later, the Legislative Assembly was formed. In the next year, the guillotine would become the official method of execution, and the massacres of the French Revolution would officially begin.